Jake Morrison drove his old pickup truck down the dirt road toward his lake cabin and felt something was wrong. He had been away for 3 months working on an asteroid mining station called Series 7, but the job finished early, so he came home, without telling anyone. The trees looked the same and the lake sparkled in the afternoon sun just like always, but there were new things that should not be there. Bright yellow cameras sat on metal poles around his property, like strange flowers, that had grown while he was gone. Fresh white gravel covered his driveway even though he never ordered any gravel. A big sign near his mailbox said, Pine Ridge Lake Community Association in fancy letters that hurt his eyes to look at. Jake scratched his beard and wondered who put up a sign on his land without asking him. His cabin sat by the water just like he left it 3 months ago. The blue paint was still peeling on the front porch and his old fishing boat was tied to the dock, but there was a bright yellow paper stuck to his front door with tape. Jake parked his truck and walked over to read it. The paper said his property was under review for violations and that someone named Linda Patterson was the president of something called an HOA. Jake had never heard of any HOA before. His family owned this land for 50 years, and nobody ever told them about joining any association. He pulled out his key and put it in the lock, but before he could turn it, a loud alarm started screaming. The sound came from speakers he had never seen before that were mounted under his roof. Within 5 minutes, 3 police cars came racing down his driveway, with their lights flashing. Jake stood on his porch with his hands visible because he knew how these things worked. The first officer to get out was Sheriff Pete Collins, who Jake had known since high school. Pete looked confused when he saw Jake standing there. Right behind the police cars came a silver sedan that cost more money than Jake made in 6 months. A woman got out wearing a white pantsuit that had never seen dirt. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight and she carried a leather folder like she was going to a business meeting. She marched over to the police officers like she owned the place. The woman pointed at Jake and said in a loud voice that he was trespassing on property that belonged to the HOA. She said the cabin had been empty for months and that she had been taking care of it for the community. Pete looked at Jake and then at the woman and seemed like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Jake pulled out his wallet and showed Pete his driver's license with the cabin address on it. Then he showed him the property deed that his father had given him when he turned 25. The deed was old and yellow, but it clearly said that Jake Morrison owned the land and everything on it. Pete nodded and looked at the woman who was getting red in the face. The woman said her name was Linda Patterson, and that she was the president of the Pine Ridge Lake Community Association. She said that Jake could not just show up and claim to own property that had been abandoned. She waved papers from her folder and said the HOA had legal authority over all lakefront properties now. Jake asked when exactly this HOA was formed and who gave them authority over his land. Linda said the HOA was formed 2 months ago when all the property owners voted to create it for better security and property values. Jake pointed out that nobody had asked him to vote on anything because he was working in space. Linda said that absent property owners automatically agreed to join the HOA unless they filed papers to opt out. Jake had never heard of such a thing, and Pete was starting to look angry. More cars arrived, including one with government plates that Jake recognized from his work with the space mining company. A man in a dark suit got out and showed credentials to Pete. The man said he was Agent Clark from Homeland Security, and that this property was now part of an ongoing investigation. Linda looked surprised and asked what kind of investigation could possibly involve a rundown cabin by a lake. Agent Clark said that certain improvements made to properties around the lake had triggered security alerts. He pointed to the cameras and scanning equipment that had been installed without proper permits. Linda insisted that everything was legal and that the equipment was donated by concerned community members who wanted to protect their investments. Jake used his phone to call his old commanding officer, Colonel Amy Rodriguez, who worked for something called Planetary Defense Division. He told her about the strange equipment and the woman who claimed his property belonged to an HOA. Amy told him to stay exactly where he was and not let anyone else touch anything on his land. She said a team was being sent immediately. Linda became more upset when she heard Jake talking to military people. She said he was obviously suffering from space sickness and could not be trusted to make decisions about property. She demanded that Pete arrest Jake for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Pete told Linda that a man could not trespass on his own property and that she needed to calm down. The argument continued for another hour while more official-looking people arrived in unmarked cars. Linda kept insisting that the HOA had legal authority and that Jake was mentally unstable from working in space. Jake stayed quiet and watched how nervous Linda was getting as more government people showed up. Something about her story did not make sense, and Jake had learned to trust his instincts during his time working in dangerous places. As the sun started to set, Linda finally got back in her silver car and drove away after promising Pete that this was not over. The government people took pictures of all the equipment and told Jake not to touch anything until experts could examine it. Pete shook Jake's hand and said he was glad to have him back home, but that Linda Patterson had been causing trouble for everyone since she moved to town 3 months ago. That night, Jake sat on his porch drinking coffee and looking at the lake. The water was calm and peaceful like always, but he could not shake the feeling that something dangerous was hiding just under the surface. Linda Patterson did not sleep well that night, and she was angry when she woke up the next morning. She had spent 3 months carefully planning everything, and now some space worker was ruining her timeline. She made coffee in her expensive kitchen and looked out at the lake while making phone calls to people who were supposed to help her with problems like this. The first call went to her lawyer in California, who told her that property law in Montana was different from what she was used to. The second call went to her business partner, who said the equipment they had installed was very expensive and could not be moved without triggering alarms. The third call went to someone she was not supposed to talk to on regular phones, but she was running out of options. Linda had moved to Montana from Silicon Valley after her tech company was bought by a larger corporation. She had made enough money to retire, but retirement was boring, so she found new ways to make money. The Pine Ridge Lake area was perfect for her plans because most of the property owners were old people who did not understand modern technology and did not ask difficult questions. She drove her silver sedan back to Jake's cabin that morning with a folder full of legal papers and a plan to make him leave voluntarily. Linda had learned that most people backed down when faced with enough paperwork and official-sounding threats. She parked in Jake's driveway and walked to his front door like she owned the place. Jake was sitting on his porch drinking coffee and reading something on a tablet computer. He looked up when Linda approached but did not stand up or invite her to sit down. Linda noticed that Jake was bigger than she remembered from yesterday, and his hands looked like they were used to hard work. His eyes were the kind of blue that came from looking at faraway places, and they watched her without blinking. Linda opened her folder and pulled out papers that said Jake was in violation of HOA rules for having an unmaintained property and unauthorized vehicles. She said his truck was too old and his boat was an eyesore that hurt property values. She also said his cabin needed new paint and that the fishing equipment on his porch violated community standards for cleanliness. Jake asked Linda who exactly voted to create this HOA and when the meeting was held. Linda said the meeting was held at the community center 2 months ago and that all property owners were notified by mail. Jake pointed out that his mail was being forwarded to his work address in space and that nobody had contacted him about any meeting. Linda said that was his problem for being irresponsible. The conversation was interrupted when a black SUV with government plates pulled into the driveway. Agent Clark got out along with 2 other people wearing dark suits and carrying metal cases. They nodded to Jake and ignored Linda completely while they set up some kind of scanning equipment near the strange cameras that had been installed around the property. Linda demanded to know what authority these people had to be on HOA property. Agent Clark showed her credentials that said he worked for something called the Extraterrestrial Artifacts Division. Linda laughed and said that was ridiculous because there were no aliens anywhere near Pine Ridge Lake. Agent Clark did not laugh back and instead asked Linda where exactly she had obtained the scanning equipment that was installed around the lake. Linda said the equipment was donated by community members who wanted better security for their investments. Agent Clark asked for the names and contact information of these community members. Linda said that information was confidential and protected by HOA privacy rules. Agent Clark said that national security investigations did not recognize HOA privacy rules. Jake watched this conversation while drinking his coffee and noticed that Linda was sweating, even though the morning was cool. She kept checking her phone and looking at her car like she wanted to leave but was afraid of what that might look like. One of the government people was running a scanner over the cameras and making notes on a tablet. The scanner started beeping loudly when it was pointed at Linda's car. Agent Clark asked Linda to open her trunk so they could examine what was causing the readings. Linda refused and said they needed a warrant to search her vehicle. Agent Clark made a phone call, and within 10 minutes, a helicopter landed in the field across from Jake's cabin. More people in dark suits got out of the helicopter along with equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. They immediately began scanning the entire area around the lake and marking locations with bright orange flags. Linda's phone kept ringing, but she stopped answering it after the third call. Jake asked Agent Clark what exactly they were looking for with all the fancy equipment. Agent Clark said they were investigating unauthorized excavation and scanning activities that had been detected by satellites. He said someone had been digging in places they were not supposed to dig, and using equipment they were not supposed to have. Linda interrupted and said that any excavation around the lake was legal construction work done with proper permits. Agent Clark asked to see these permits, and Linda said they were filed with the county office. Agent Clark said he had already checked with the county office, and no permits had been filed for any work around Pine Ridge Lake in the past 6 months. The government people spent the rest of the morning scanning and taking pictures while Linda sat in her car making phone calls. Jake could see that she was getting more upset with each call and that whoever she was talking to was not telling her what she wanted to hear. By noon, Linda's expensive pantsuit was wrinkled, and her perfect hair was starting to come loose. Sheriff Pete Collins arrived just as the government people were packing up their equipment. He said he had gotten calls from 3 other property owners around the lake saying that people in dark suits were scanning their land without permission. Agent Clark showed Pete some paperwork that made Pete nod and stop asking questions. Linda got out of her car and demanded that Pete arrest Agent Clark for harassment and illegal search. Pete said that federal agents did not need his permission to investigate national security matters. Linda said there were no national security matters at a lake in Montana, and that everyone was overreacting to simple community improvements. Agent Clark told Jake that he would receive a full briefing soon, but that for now he should not touch any of the equipment that had been installed on his property. He also said that Jake should be very careful about who he allowed on his land, because some people were not who they claimed to be. Linda heard this and got back in her car without saying goodbye to anyone. As the government vehicles drove away, Jake sat back down on his porch and thought about what he had learned. Linda Patterson was not just a difficult neighbor with too much money and time. She was connected to something bigger and more dangerous than an argument about property values. Jake had worked in enough dangerous places to recognize when someone was hiding important secrets, and Linda was definitely hiding something that could get people hurt. That evening, Jake sat on his dock with his feet in the water and used his mining scanner to check the strange equipment around his property. The scanner was disguised as a regular tablet computer, but it could detect mineral compositions and energy signatures that normal people would never notice. What he found made him very worried about what Linda Patterson was really doing at Pine Ridge Lake. The cameras that Linda claimed were for security were actually military-grade surveillance devices with quantum encryption systems. Jake had seen similar equipment during his work on deep space mining stations, where they were used to monitor alien artifact sites. The scanning equipment was even more concerning because it was designed to detect specific types of electromagnetic radiation that only came from extraterrestrial technology. Jake walked around his property in the dark using the scanner to map all the equipment that had been installed while he was away. The readings showed a network of sensors that extended far beyond his land and connected to similar installations around the entire lake. Someone had turned Pine Ridge Lake into a giant scanning array that was looking for something buried underground. The most disturbing discovery came when Jake pointed his scanner at the lake itself. Deep beneath the water were energy signatures that matched exactly what he had encountered during his last mission in the asteroid belt. The readings indicated a large metallic structure buried in the lake bottom that was definitely not made by humans. Jake had found alien technology right under his childhood fishing spot. Jake immediately called Colonel Amy Rodriguez on his secure satellite phone. Amy answered on the first ring, even though it was past midnight on the East Coast. Jake told her about the scanner readings and sent her the data files through an encrypted connection. Amy was quiet for a long time after reviewing the information. Amy told Jake that similar energy signatures had been detected at 17 other locations around Earth over the past 6 months. In every case, someone had been using illegal scanning equipment to locate and map alien artifacts that had been hidden for unknown amounts of time. The people doing the scanning were connected to a corporate network that was trying to claim and excavate alien technology for profit. The conversation was interrupted when Jake's motion sensors detected someone moving around his property. Jake turned off his lights and used his night vision scope to see Linda Patterson creeping through the trees toward his cabin. She was carrying a large backpack and some kind of electronic device that was beeping softly as she moved closer to the water. Jake watched Linda set up equipment on his dock and begin scanning the lake bottom with professional-grade sonar gear. She worked quickly and quietly like someone who had done this many times before. Jake used his phone to record video of everything Linda was doing while staying hidden in the shadows near his cabin. After an hour of scanning, Linda made a phone call, using a satellite phone similar to the one Jake carried for his space work. Jake could not hear what she was saying, but he could see that she was excited about something she had found in the lake. Linda packed up her equipment and disappeared back into the trees as quietly as she had arrived. The next morning, Jake received a visit from Ben Cooper, who owned the cabin next door. Ben was a retired Marine who had moved to Montana after serving 3 tours in Afghanistan. He was one of the few neighbors who had been friendly when Jake was growing up, and the only one who understood what it was like to work in dangerous places far from home. Ben said that Linda Patterson had been bothering all the lake property owners for the past 3 months with legal papers and demands to join her HOA. Several elderly residents had signed agreements they did not understand because Linda convinced them it was required by law. Ben had refused to sign anything and told Linda to stay off his property. Ben also said that strange trucks had been coming and going around the lake during the night. The trucks carried equipment covered by tarps, and the drivers wore uniforms from a security company that nobody in town had ever heard of. Ben had tried to follow one of the trucks, but it disappeared into a restricted area near the old mining road that had been closed for years. Jake told Ben about the government investigation and the alien technology readings, but did not mention seeing Linda on his property the night before. Ben nodded and said he had suspected something like this was happening because Linda was too interested in properties that should not be valuable to someone from California with enough money to retire. They were interrupted when Helen Martinez arrived, carrying a plate of cookies and looking worried. Helen taught at the local elementary school and had lived at the lake longer than anyone except Jake's family. She said that Linda had been asking strange questions about the history of the lake and whether anyone had ever found unusual objects while fishing or swimming. Helen said that Linda was particularly interested in stories about lights in the sky and strange sounds coming from the lake at night. Several old-timers had told Linda about incidents from the 1960s when military personnel had come to the lake and told everyone to stay away from certain areas. Linda had taken notes and asked for names of people who might remember more details. Jake realized that Linda's research went back much further than 3 months. She had been planning this operation for a long time and had specifically chosen Pine Ridge Lake because she knew alien technology was hidden there. The HOA scheme was just a way to gain legal access to properties so she could search for artifacts without interference. Ben asked Jake what they should do about Linda and her illegal activities. Jake said that the government investigation would handle the legal aspects, but that they needed to protect their neighbors from being taken advantage of by people who did not care about anything except making money. Helen agreed and said that several elderly residents were scared and confused by all the legal papers and official-looking people. Jake suggested that they organize the legitimate property owners to resist Linda's HOA and document everything suspicious that happened around the lake. Ben said he would contact a lawyer friend who specialized in property rights, and Helen said she would talk to the other neighbors who had been pressured to sign agreements with Linda. That afternoon, Jake used his scanner to map the entire alien artifact buried in the lake. The structure was enormous and appeared to be some kind of communication device or power station. The technology was similar to artifacts that human explorers had found throughout the galaxy, but this one was much larger and more complex than anything discovered before. Jake realized that Pine Ridge Lake was not just his family's property or a peaceful retirement community. It was sitting on top of one of the most important archaeological discoveries in human history, and Linda Patterson was trying to steal it for personal profit. Jake had spent his career helping humanity expand into space by mining asteroids and processing alien materials, but now he needed to protect an alien site right here on Earth. The sun was setting when Jake noticed boats moving across the lake in the distance. The boats were using electric motors and running without lights, which meant they were trying to avoid being seen. Jake used his binoculars to count 4 boats carrying equipment toward the center of the lake, where his scanner readings were strongest. Linda's operation was moving into the next phase, and Jake needed to be ready to stop them. Jake spent the entire night watching the boats through his night vision scope and recording everything they did. The crews worked in professional teams using underwater scanning equipment to map the alien artifact beneath the lake. They were careful not to disturb the water surface and used sound dampeners to hide their sonar pings from anyone who might be listening. By dawn, the boats had returned to a hidden dock on the far side of the lake where they were loaded onto trailers and driven away. Jake used his binoculars to get license plate numbers and took pictures of the men operating the equipment. Everything about their operation screamed military training and corporate funding, which meant Linda Patterson was working for people with serious resources. Jake called Colonel Amy Rodriguez again and sent her all the evidence he had collected during the night. Amy said that satellite surveillance had detected similar operations at 3 other artifact sites, and that a joint task force was being assembled to stop what appeared to be the largest illegal excavation operation in history. She told Jake that his location was now the primary target, and that he should expect significant backup within 24 hours. Amy also warned Jake that the people behind this operation had already killed 2 security guards at another site, and would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who interfered with their timeline. Jake said he understood the risks, but that he was not going to let anyone steal alien technology from his family's land or threaten his neighbors. Amy said she expected nothing less from someone who had survived 3 years mining asteroids in hostile space. That morning, Helen Martinez called Jake to say that Linda Patterson had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for that evening at the community center. Linda was telling people that Jake was mentally unstable from his time in space, and that his presence was threatening property values and community safety. Several neighbors had received legal papers demanding that they support Linda's petition to have Jake removed from his property. Ben Cooper arrived at Jake's cabin with coffee and news that Linda had hired private security to patrol the lake and enforce HOA regulations. The security guards were carrying weapons and stopping residents from using their own docks and boats. Ben said that elderly couple Frank and Mary Johnson had been told they could not fish from their own shoreline because it violated community standards. Jake realized that Linda was escalating her tactics because she knew the government investigation was closing in on her operation. She needed to control access to the lake before federal agents could establish a permanent presence at the artifact site. The emergency HOA meeting was probably a cover for something more dangerous than just legal paperwork. Jake decided to attend the meeting, but asked Ben to stay hidden near the community center with a radio in case things went wrong. Helen said she would also attend the meeting and bring several other longtime residents who were getting tired of Linda's threats and demands. Jake strapped on body armor under his jacket and carried his emergency beacon that would summon military rescue if activated. The community center was packed with people Jake had not seen before, along with the legitimate lake residents who looked confused and scared. Linda stood at the front of the room wearing another expensive business suit and carrying a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars. Behind her stood 3 men in dark suits who were obviously not from Montana. Linda started the meeting by declaring that Jake Morrison was a security threat who needed to be removed from the community immediately. She said his military background and space work had made him paranoid and aggressive toward normal citizens who were just trying to protect their investments. Several people in the audience nodded along, but Jake noticed they were the same strangers he had never seen around the lake before. Helen stood up and said that Jake's family had owned lake property for 50 years, and that Linda had no right to force anyone to leave their own land. Frank Johnson added that Linda's security guards had threatened him when he tried to use his own dock to go fishing. Mary Johnson said that Linda was trying to charge fees for things that had always been free, like using the boat launch and hiking on public trails. Linda became angry and said that people who refused to follow HOA rules were hurting everyone's property values, and safety. She pulled out papers that said Jake was in violation of multiple community standards, and that his presence was grounds for legal action against all property owners who allowed him to stay. The strangers in the audience started clapping, but the real residents looked more confused than convinced. One of the men in dark suits stepped forward and said he was a lawyer representing the HOA's legal interests. He said that Jake's military equipment and satellite communications were illegal in a residential area, and that his scanning activities were disturbing the peace. Jake realized that Linda's people had been watching him much more closely than he had thought. Jake stood up and asked the lawyer to show his credentials and explain exactly what legal authority he claimed to have over private property. The lawyer refused to answer and said that people who interfered with lawful HOA activities could face criminal charges. Jake said that threatening property owners with fake legal papers was fraud, and that real lawyers did not hide their credentials from the people they claimed to represent. The meeting erupted into arguments between Linda's supporters and the legitimate residents who were tired of being bullied and threatened. During the chaos, Jake noticed that two of the strangers had quietly left the room and were probably reporting to someone outside. Jake activated his emergency beacon and hoped that Colonel Rodriguez's people were close enough to respond quickly. Linda shouted for order and said that people who continued to disrupt the meeting would be banned from all community facilities and subject to legal action. Helen laughed and pointed out that Linda did not own the community center or any other public facilities. Ben Cooper appeared in the doorway and gave Jake a signal that meant trouble was coming from outside. Jake looked out the window and saw black SUVs surrounding the community center, along with men carrying military weapons who were definitely not local law enforcement. Linda's operation was moving into its final phase, and they were planning to eliminate everyone who could interfere with their artifact extraction. Jake realized that the emergency meeting was a trap designed to gather all the problematic residents in one place. Jake told Helen and the other residents to get down on the floor and stay away from the windows. He pulled out his satellite phone and called Sheriff Pete Collins to report armed men surrounding a community meeting. Pete said he was already on his way with backup because someone had reported suspicious vehicles near the lake road. Linda was talking urgently with her lawyer and the other men in suits while looking toward the exits like she was planning to leave quickly. Jake blocked the main door and told Linda that nobody was going anywhere until federal agents arrived to sort out what was really happening around Pine Ridge Lake. Linda said that Jake was holding people hostage and that her security team would be forced to intervene. The lights went out and emergency lighting kicked in as the sound of helicopters filled the air outside. Through the windows, Jake could see military vehicles arriving and soldiers taking positions around the black SUVs. Colonel Rodriguez's voice came over Jake's radio telling him to keep everyone inside until the area was secure. Linda's lawyer was shouting into his phone that the operation was blown and they needed immediate extraction. Linda looked terrified as she realized that her carefully planned timeline had collapsed and that federal agents were about to discover everything she had been hiding. Jake smiled and told Linda that people who tried to steal from his neighbors and threaten his family always ended up learning that some things were worth fighting for no matter how much money was involved. Colonel Amy Rodriguez entered the community center wearing full combat gear and carrying a tablet computer that displayed satellite images of the entire Pine Ridge Lake area. Behind her came Agent Clark and a team of specialists who immediately began scanning everyone in the room with handheld devices that beeped when pointed at Linda Patterson and her associates. Amy nodded to Jake and told everyone to remain calm while federal agents secured the area. Linda demanded to see warrants and legal authorization for what she called an illegal military occupation of a peaceful community meeting. Amy showed Linda credentials that identified her as the commanding officer of Earth's Extraterrestrial Artifact Security Division and explained that national security laws superseded local property disputes when alien technology was involved. Linda laughed and said that was ridiculous because there were no aliens at Pine Ridge Lake. Amy activated her tablet and projected holographic images that showed the massive alien communication relay buried beneath the lake along with detailed scans of all the illegal excavation equipment that had been installed around the water. The images clearly showed that someone had been systematically mapping and preparing to extract components from one of the largest alien artifacts ever discovered on Earth. The room fell silent as residents saw proof that their peaceful lake was sitting on top of technology from another world. Helen Martinez asked if the artifact was dangerous, and Amy explained that the relay appeared to be dormant, but that disturbing it incorrectly could trigger defensive systems that might destroy everything within a 50-mile radius. Linda's face went white as she realized that her operation could have killed thousands of people. Amy continued by explaining that Linda Patterson was not actually a retired tech executive from California, but rather an advanced scout for a corporate consortium called Titan Acquisitions that specialized in illegally harvesting alien technology for private profit. The consortium had been operating on 17 worlds throughout human space and had caused 3 major disasters by attempting to extract artifacts without proper scientific protocols. Linda's lawyer tried to deny everything, but Amy showed communication, intercepts that proved he was actually a corporate security specialist who had been coordinating the Pine Ridge operation with extraction teams on other worlds. The other men in suits were revealed to be military contractors who had been hired to eliminate witnesses and cover up evidence once the artifact extraction was complete. Jake asked Amy how long the government had known about the alien relay under the lake. Amy said that satellite surveys had detected the artifact 6 months ago, but that Titan Acquisitions had somehow obtained the same data and had moved faster than the official investigation. Linda's HOA scheme was designed to gain legal control of the necessary properties before federal agents could establish a research station. Amy explained that the alien communication relay was part of a galaxy-spanning network that had been built by an ancient civilization millions of years ago. Similar relays had been found throughout human space and appeared to be designed for instant communication across impossible distances. The Pine Ridge relay was unique because it was still partially active and might contain data about other relay locations. Ben Cooper asked if activating the relay would contact aliens, and Amy said that was exactly what they were hoping to achieve. Humanity had been trying to make contact with the relay builders for 20 years, but most of the discovered relays had been damaged by time or previous civilizations. The Pine Ridge relay might be humanity's best chance to communicate with beings who had mastered interstellar travel millions of years before humans existed. Linda interrupted to say that the alien technology should be sold to the highest bidder, rather than wasted on government research that would take decades to produce results. She argued that private corporations could develop alien technology faster and more efficiently than bureaucratic scientists who were afraid to take risks. Amy said that Linda's attitude was exactly why Titan Acquisitions was considered a terrorist organization by every civilized world in human space. Amy showed the room evidence that Titan Acquisitions had already caused the deaths of over 300 researchers and civilians during botched extraction operations on other worlds. The corporation cared nothing about scientific knowledge or peaceful contact with aliens, and was only interested in stealing technology that could be reverse-engineered into weapons and sold to the highest bidder. Helen asked what would happen to the lake community now that the truth was revealed. Amy said that Pine Ridge Lake would become a protected research site under international treaty, but that legitimate property owners would be compensated and allowed to remain if they wanted. The area would actually become much safer and more valuable because it would be protected by international security forces. Jake asked about the people who had been tricked into signing HOA agreements with Linda. Amy said that all contracts signed under false pretenses would be voided, and that anyone who had been defrauded would receive full compensation from assets seized from Titan Acquisitions. The corporation had billions of dollars in illegal profits that would be distributed to their victims. Linda made one last attempt to escape by claiming that she was just a low-level employee who had been following orders from corporate executives. Amy showed her communication records that proved Linda was actually a senior partner in Titan Acquisitions, who had personally planned operations on 7 different worlds. Linda had made over $50 million from selling stolen alien technology and had ordered the deaths of anyone who interfered with her operations. Sheriff Pete Collins arrived with state and federal law enforcement officers who began arresting Linda and her associates on charges that included terrorism, murder, theft of extraterrestrial artifacts, fraud, and conspiracy against planetary security. Linda was still arguing about her rights when she was led away in handcuffs, But everyone in the room could see that her expensive clothes and perfect appearance were just costumes worn by someone who cared nothing about human life or scientific discovery. Amy told the residents that they would all be interviewed by federal agents over the next few days, but that no one was in trouble for being deceived by Linda's lies. She said that the government was grateful to Jake for detecting the illegal operation and to the community for standing up to corporate bullies who thought money gave them the right to steal from honest people. Frank Johnson asked if they would ever be able to fish in the lake again, and Amy said that recreational activities would continue as normal once the research station was established. She explained that the alien relay was buried too deep to affect surface activities and that the lake would actually benefit from having international protection and scientific oversight. As federal agents secured the area and began dismantling Linda's illegal equipment, Jake stood on the shore of Pine Ridge Lake and thought about how much his quiet fishing spot had changed in just a few days. The water looked the same, and the mountain still reflected in its surface, but now everyone knew that ancient alien technology lay sleeping beneath the peaceful waves. Amy joined Jake by the water and said that he would be offered a position as liaison between the research team and the local community. She said his experience with alien technology and his connections to the area made him perfect for helping scientists and residents work together. Jake said he would think about it, but that he was mostly just glad his neighbors were safe and his family's land was protected from people who wanted to destroy it for profit. Within 24 hours, Pine Ridge Lake was transformed from a quiet fishing community into the most secure research site on Earth. Military engineers arrived with prefabricated buildings that were assembled into a command center overlooking the water, while teams of scientists began deploying equipment to study the alien relay without disturbing its delicate systems. Jake found himself in the middle of the largest archaeological operation in human history. Colonel Rodriguez assigned Jake as the official liaison between the military research team and the local community because his experience with alien technology made him uniquely qualified to translate between scientific language and practical concerns. Jake's first job was helping longtime residents understand that their lives were about to change in ways that would benefit everyone, if handled correctly. Dr. Sarah Wilson arrived from the Smithsonian Institution with a team of xenoarchaeologists who specialized in studying alien artifacts without damaging them. She explained to Jake that the Pine Ridge Relay was the most complete example of ancient alien communication technology ever discovered, and that studying it correctly could advance human science by centuries. The key was patience and careful analysis rather than the destructive extraction methods favored by corporations like Titan Acquisitions. Jake spent his mornings working with the research teams and his afternoons meeting with neighbors who had questions about how the government presence would affect their daily lives. Ben Cooper was concerned about fishing access, and Helen Martinez wanted to know if her students could visit the research station for educational tours. Frank and Mary Johnson were worried that property taxes would increase because of all the government attention. Dr. Wilson showed Jake how the alien relay was connected to similar devices throughout the galaxy, and explained that activating it properly could allow humanity to communicate with civilizations that had been traveling between stars for millions of years. She said the relay appeared to be designed for peaceful contact, rather than military purposes, which suggested that its builders were more interested in sharing knowledge than conquering other species. The research work was interrupted when satellite surveillance detected Titan Acquisition ships approaching Earth from 3 different directions. Colonel Rodriguez called an emergency briefing and explained that the corporation was launching a military operation to seize the Pine Ridge Relay before international law could protect it permanently. The ships carried heavy weapons and assault troops who were prepared to fight Earth's defense forces for control of the alien technology. Jake volunteered to help coordinate the defense of Pine Ridge Lake because he had worked on corporate mining stations and understood how Titan Acquisitions operated. The corporation relied on overwhelming force and surprise attacks to steal artifacts before legitimate authorities could respond. Their strategy worked on frontier worlds with limited defenses, but Earth had the largest military in human space and would not be intimidated by corporate terrorists. Admiral Kate Stevens arrived from Earth Defense Command with a fleet of warships that took positions around the planet, while ground forces established defensive perimeters around all known alien artifact sites. She explained to Jake that the battle for Pine Ridge Lake would determine whether humanity's expansion into space would be guided by scientific principles or dominated by corporate greed and violence. The first Titan acquisition ships arrived at the edge of the solar system and immediately began jamming communications while deploying stealth drones to scout Earth's defenses. Jake used his knowledge of corporate tactics to predict that they would try to land assault teams at multiple locations around the lake, while using orbital bombardment to destroy any resistance. The key to stopping them was making sure they could not establish a foothold on the ground. Dr. Wilson made an urgent discovery when her deep scans revealed that the alien relay was designed with defensive capabilities that would activate automatically if it detected threats to the surrounding area. She warned Colonel Rodriguez that a battle near the relay could trigger ancient weapon systems that might consider all humans to be hostile invaders. The defense of Pine Ridge Lake needed to be conducted carefully to avoid accidentally starting a war with alien technology. Jake suggested using the lake's natural geography to funnel Titan acquisitions forces into killing zones where Earth's defenders could destroy them without triggering the relay's defensive systems. The mountains and forests around Pine Ridge provided perfect cover for anti-aircraft weapons, while the lake itself could be mined to prevent hostile ships from landing on the water. Helen Martinez and the other residents were evacuated to a secure facility 50 miles away, while Jake and a volunteer team of local veterans stayed behind to help guide the military defense. Ben Cooper had served in special forces and knew how to use the terrain around the lake to hide weapons and supplies. Frank Johnson had been a combat engineer and helped design obstacles that would slow down enemy advance teams. The battle began before dawn, when Titan Acquisitions dropships tried to land assault teams on the far shore of the lake. Earth's defense forces were waiting with surface-to-air missiles that destroyed most of the ships before they could unload their troops. The few corporate soldiers who survived the landing found themselves trapped in a crossfire between hidden, defensive positions that had been carefully planned to protect the alien relay. Jake coordinated communications between the various defensive teams while monitoring the alien relay for signs that its defensive systems were activating. Dr. Wilson had given him a scanner that would detect energy buildups that might indicate the ancient weapons were preparing to fire. So far, the relay remained dormant, but Jake could see that it was definitely aware of the battle raging around it. The corporate assault continued throughout the day, as Titan Acquisitions tried increasingly desperate tactics to reach the relay site. They used orbital bombardment to destroy the research station, but the important equipment had already been moved to secure bunkers. They landed paratroopers in the surrounding mountains, but Earth's forces had anticipated this and were waiting with heavy weapons and air support. Admiral Stevens coordinated the space battle from her flagship while providing fire support for the ground forces defending Pine Ridge Lake. Titan Acquisitions had brought 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen assault ships, but Earth's home fleet outnumbered them 5-1 and had the advantage of defending familiar territory. The corporate ships were designed for attacking poorly defended frontier worlds and could not match the firepower of Earth's military. By evening, it was clear that Titan Acquisitions had underestimated both Earth's defenses and the determination of people who were protecting their home world from corporate invasion. The surviving corporate ships were retreating toward the edge of the solar system, while their ground forces were either dead or surrendering to Earth's security forces. The alien relay had remained completely inactive throughout the battle. Jake stood on the dock where he had spent countless hours fishing as a child and watched the last Titan Acquisition ship disappear into hyperspace. The lake was scarred by battle damage and several buildings had been destroyed, but the ancient alien technology was safe and the community was still protected. Colonel Rodriguez joined him and said that the victory at Pine Ridge Lake had sent a message throughout human space that Earth would not tolerate corporate terrorism. Dr. Wilson reported that the alien relay had monitored the entire battle and appeared to have concluded that humanity was capable of defending itself without resorting to the destructive tactics used by the corporation. She said this might actually improve the chances of successful communication with the relay builders, because it demonstrated that humans could distinguish between legitimate scientific research and criminal exploitation of alien technology. That night, Jake sat in his cabin and called Helen Martinez to tell her that it was safe for residents to return home. She said the children at her school were excited about living near a real alien archaeological site and wanted to know if they could meet actual scientists. Jake promised to arrange educational visits once the research station was rebuilt, and the area was completely secure from future corporate attacks. 3 weeks after the failed Titan Acquisitions assault, Jake was working in his garden when his emergency communicator started beeping with an urgent message from Colonel Rodriguez. Satellite surveillance had detected a single stealth ship approaching Earth using advanced cloaking technology that was barely visible to military sensors. The ship's energy signature matched Titan Acquisitions equipment, but it was much smaller than the previous attack force. Jake immediately contacted Dr. Wilson, who was working at the temporary research station that had been built to replace the one destroyed in the battle. She said that her sensors were detecting unusual activity from the alien relay that suggested it was responding to something approaching from space. The ancient technology appeared to be coming online for the first time since the research began, which could mean either first contact or massive destruction. Colonel Rodriguez arrived at Jake's cabin within an hour, along with a strike team of Special Forces soldiers who had experience fighting corporate mercenaries on frontier worlds. She explained that intelligence reports suggested Titan Acquisitions was making one final desperate attempt to steal components from the alien relay before international courts could permanently ban their operations throughout human space. The stealth ship had landed somewhere in the mountains near Pine Ridge Lake and was using advanced camouflage to hide from military detection systems. Jake volunteered to help track down the corporate infiltration team because his knowledge of the local terrain and alien technology made him the best qualified person to predict where they would try to access the relay. Colonel Rodriguez agreed, but insisted that Jake wear full combat armor and carry military-grade weapons. Jake led the search team through the forests around the lake using tracking skills he had learned during survival training for asteroid mining operations. The corporate infiltrators had tried to hide their trail, but Jake could see broken branches and disturbed ground that showed they were moving toward the underwater access points that Dr. Wilson's team had mapped during their research. The infiltrators knew exactly where they were going, which meant they had inside information about the research operation. The trail led to a hidden cave system that connected to underwater tunnels that had been carved by the alien relay builders millions of years ago. Jake realized that the corporate team was planning to access the relay directly, rather than trying to fight through Earth's surface defenses. They could plant explosive charges that would blast components loose from the relay, without caring about the damage they caused to the ancient structure. Colonel Rodriguez called for backup, while Jake used his alien technology scanner to detect energy signatures from the infiltration team's equipment. The readings showed that the corporate soldiers were carrying devices that could interface directly with alien technology and override its safety systems. If they succeeded in connecting to the relay, they could trigger a catastrophic explosion that would destroy everything within 100 miles. Jake led the strike team into the cave system using night vision equipment and sound dampeners to avoid alerting the corporate infiltrators to their presence. The tunnels were carved from solid rock using technology that human engineers still did not understand, and they stretched for miles beneath the lake. Jake had explored similar tunnels on asteroid mining stations and knew how easy it was to get lost in alien architecture. The team followed the tunnel system toward the strongest energy readings while Jake monitored his scanner for signs that the corporate soldiers had reached the relay chamber. The alien technology was definitely responding to their presence, and Jake could feel vibrations through the rock that suggested massive machinery was starting to activate after millions of years of dormancy. The relay builders had designed their technology to defend itself against unauthorized access. They reached the main relay chamber just as the corporate infiltration team was setting up their extraction equipment around a crystalline structure the size of a small building. Jake counted 6 heavily armed soldiers wearing powered armor and carrying weapons that could punch through military vehicle armor. Their leader was connecting interface cables to alien control surfaces, while his team prepared explosive charges. Colonel Rodriguez signaled for the strike team to take firing positions, while Jake used his scanner to analyze what the corporate team was trying to do. The readings showed that they were attempting to download the relay's complete database of galactic communication protocols and star charts. If they succeeded, they could sell the information to hostile alien civilizations or use it to locate other relay sites throughout the galaxy. Jake realized that the corporate leader was not just trying to steal components from the relay, but was actually attempting to activate its communication systems to contact the builders directly. The interface equipment he was using was designed to send messages claiming that humanity had discovered the relay and wanted to establish peaceful contact. Once the builders responded, the corporate team could intercept their signals and learn the location of their home worlds. The alien relay responded to the unauthorized activation attempt by triggering defensive systems that had been dormant for millions of years. Energy began building in the crystalline structure, while warning signals echoed through the chamber in harmonics that hurt human ears. Jake realized that the relay was preparing to sterilize the entire area to prevent contamination of its systems by unauthorized users. Jake shouted a warning to Colonel Rodriguez that they had less than 5 minutes before the relay's defenses would kill everyone in the chamber and probably destroy Pine Ridge Lake as well. The corporate team ignored the warning signs and continued their extraction operation because they were being paid enough money to risk their lives for alien technology. Their leader was frantically trying to complete the interface connection before Earth's forces could stop him. The strike team opened fire on the corporate soldiers, while Jake ran toward the alien control surfaces to try to shut down the defensive activation sequence. The corporate leader saw him coming and fired a plasma weapon that barely missed Jake's head. Jake used his asteroid mining experience with alien technology to identify the emergency shutdown controls, while bullets and energy beams filled the air around him. Jake managed to access the relay's safety systems just as the defensive sequence reached critical levels. He used protocols he had learned from studying similar alien technology to convince the relay that the unauthorized access had been terminated and that the chamber was secure. The energy buildup slowly decreased while the warning signals faded to silence. The surviving corporate soldiers surrendered when they realized their extraction operation had failed and that they were trapped underground with no escape route. Their leader had been killed in the firefight, but his interface equipment was still connected to the alien relay. Jake carefully disconnected the corporate hardware while monitoring the relay for signs that it had been damaged by the unauthorized access attempt. Colonel Rodriguez called for engineering teams to secure the relay chamber and remove all traces of the corporate infiltration equipment. Jake used his scanner to verify that the alien technology was stable and that no permanent damage had been done to systems that humanity was still trying to understand. The relay appeared to have returned to its dormant state, but Jake could sense that it was now aware of human presence in ways it had not been before. Dr. Wilson arrived with a team of xenoarchaeologists who began documenting everything that had happened during the infiltration attempt. She said that the corporate team's crude activation attempt might actually have helped the research effort by triggering diagnostic systems that revealed new information about how the relay functioned. The alien builders had designed their technology to be resistant to exactly the kind of destructive exploitation that Titan acquisitions represented. Jake emerged from the tunnels as the sun was rising over Pine Ridge Lake and felt grateful that his family's peaceful fishing spot had survived. Another attempt by corporate greed to destroy something ancient and irreplaceable. The lake looked the same as it had when he was a child, but now everyone knew that it was connected to mysteries that spanned the galaxy and linked humanity to civilizations that had mastered the stars millions of years before Earth even existed. 6 months after the final Titan acquisitions attack, Pine Ridge Lake had become the most important scientific research facility on Earth, while somehow maintaining its character as a peaceful mountain community. Jake stood on his dock watching Dr. Wilson's team conduct their morning scans of the alien relay, while Ben Cooper taught his grandson to fish from the same spot where Jake had learned as a child. The international courts had moved quickly to prosecute Linda Patterson and her corporate associates for crimes against humanity that included terrorism, murder, theft of extraterrestrial artifacts, and conspiracy to endanger planetary security. Linda received a life sentence in a maximum security prison on Europa, while her corporate partners were scattered across penal colonies throughout human space. The message was clear that stealing alien technology would not be tolerated anywhere in the galaxy. All the fraudulent HOA contracts were voided, and the legitimate property owners around Pine Ridge Lake received full compensation for the disruption to their lives, plus additional payments from the seized assets of Titan acquisitions. Frank and Mary Johnson used their settlement money to renovate their cabin and buy a new fishing boat. Helen Martinez established a scholarship fund for local students who wanted to study xenoarchaeology and interstellar communications. Jake accepted the position as permanent liaison between the research station and the local community, which meant he could stay in his family's cabin while helping humanity make contact with ancient alien civilizations. His work involved translating between the complex scientific language used by researchers and the practical concerns of neighbors who wanted to understand how their lives were changing. Dr. Wilson made breakthrough discoveries almost weekly as her team learned to communicate with the alien relay using protocols that were based on mathematical concepts rather than spoken language. The relay builders had designed their technology to be accessible to any species that achieved spaceflight, regardless of their biological or cultural differences. The key was approaching the relay with genuine scientific curiosity rather than corporate greed. The relay responded positively to humanity's patient and respectful research methods by gradually revealing more of its capabilities and sharing information about the galactic communication network it was part of. The data included star charts showing the locations of thousands of other relays throughout the galaxy, along with basic information about the civilizations that had used them over millions of years. Ben Cooper became the unofficial tour guide for the steady stream of visitors who came to Pine Ridge Lake to see where humanity had made its first successful contact with ancient alien technology. He enjoyed telling tourists about how a greedy corporation had tried to steal alien artifacts, but had been stopped by ordinary people who cared more about their community than money. The story always ended with Ben pointing out that the most important scientific discovery in human history had been protected by neighbors helping neighbors. Helen Martinez's elementary school students became the first children on Earth to grow up with daily access to active alien technology, and they adapted to the situation with the flexibility that made humans successful throughout the galaxy. The research station offered educational programs that taught local children about xenoarchaeology, interstellar communication, and the importance of approaching alien civilizations with respect rather than fear or greed. Sheriff Pete Collins found that his quiet mountain county had become a model for how human communities could coexist with alien archaeological sites without losing their local character or independence. Law enforcement agencies throughout human space sent officers to Pine Ridge Lake to learn how rural communities could maintain security around extraterrestrial artifacts while preserving the rights and traditions of local residents. Jake received regular updates from Colonel Rodriguez about similar alien relay sites that had been discovered on 17 other worlds throughout human space. In every case, the research was proceeding peacefully under international supervision with full respect for local communities and indigenous rights. The Titan acquisitions model of corporate exploitation had been completely discredited and replaced by cooperative scientific investigation that benefited everyone. The alien relay builders finally responded to humanity's communication attempts on a crisp autumn morning when Jake was sitting on his porch drinking coffee and reading reports from other relay sites. Dr. Wilson's excited voice came over his radio, saying that the relay was receiving an incoming message using the galactic communication protocols that her team had been learning to operate. Jake hurried to the research station where scientists from around the world were gathering to witness humanity's first real conversation with an ancient alien civilization. The message was transmitted through mathematical concepts and symbolic representations that took several hours to decode, but the meaning was clear and encouraging. The relay builders were pleased that humans had approached their technology with patience and scientific curiosity, rather than destructive greed. The alien message included an invitation for humanity to join the Galactic Communication Network as a junior member civilization with access to educational resources and cultural exchange opportunities. The relay builders explained that they were not a single species, but rather a collective of thousands of civilizations that had achieved interstellar travel and chosen to share knowledge rather than compete for resources. Jake realized that Linda Patterson's corporate exploitation scheme had actually helped humanity by demonstrating that Earth could distinguish between legitimate scientific research and criminal greed. The alien relay builders had been monitoring human activities around all the relay sites and had concluded that humanity was ready for peaceful contact based on how the Pine Ridge Lake community had handled the discovery of alien technology. The Message also included technical specifications for upgrading Earth's relay to full active status, which would allow real-time communication with alien civilizations throughout the galaxy. The upgrade process would take several years and require international cooperation, but would eventually give humanity access to millions of years of accumulated scientific and cultural knowledge from species across the galaxy. Jake spent the evening walking around Pine Ridge Lake and thinking about how much had changed since he returned from his asteroid mining job to find strange cameras on his property. The peaceful water reflected the same mountains and forests that had comforted his family for generations, but now everyone knew that the lake was connected to a network of civilizations that spanned the galaxy. Dr. Wilson joined Jake by the water and said that the alien relay builders had specifically mentioned humanity's respect for local communities and individual property rights as positive indicators of species maturity. She said that Jake's determination to protect his family's land and his neighbors' rights had played a crucial role in convincing ancient alien civilizations that humans were ready for galactic membership. Ben Cooper's grandson ran up to Jake and asked if the aliens would want to go fishing with them when they visited Earth. Jake laughed and said that was exactly the kind of question that proved humans were ready to be friends with beings from other worlds. The boy nodded seriously and said he would teach the aliens how to bait hooks and clean fish, because those were important skills that everyone should know. As the sun set over Pine Ridge Lake, Jake sat on his dock with his feet in the water and felt grateful that greed and corporate violence had not succeeded in destroying something ancient and wonderful. The lake was still peaceful and the fishing was still good, but now it was also the place where humanity had proven itself worthy of joining a community of civilizations that stretched across the stars. The alien relay hummed quietly beneath the water, sending messages to distant worlds about the small mountain community that had chosen cooperation over exploitation and neighbors over profit. Jake Morrison had come home from mining asteroids to find that his family's fishing spot was the center of the galaxy. But somehow that felt exactly right for a place where people had always believed that the most important things in life could not be bought or sold.